Hello, this is Jenny Fern, and today I want to continue my garden wrap-up by talking about tomatoes. We'll see if we get into other subjects, and you can probably tell by the title of the video, but I'll start off with tomatoes. So we had our first frost maybe like 2 weeks ago now. It's been a while. And we haven't had any like freezes since then. So I actually had some potatoes that I forgot to cover, and those froze. And now I have green regrowth that's doing fine. And so any subsequent frosts, I'll just put like a blanket or something over them so that they have a chance of surviving. And yeah, I tore out everything that was summer related, everything that was frost tender, except for a few things growing like flowers and stuff, which I didn't tear out. And it's kind of interesting because some things were unaffected and some things were killed, right? So my garden beds in the backyard got very stricken by the frost, except for my nasturtium, which was somewhat shielded by the plants around it, and it's fine. And there's some plants that are closer to the walls of the house that are doing just okay. But of course everything that's like kind of exposed out in the open had died. So I took out all of my squash, all the zucchinis, all of the tomatoes, which I actually filmed some of the taking out of the tomatoes so I can share that footage instead of this. I really would love to do the style of video where I take you out into the garden and talk to you there, because I love to watch those, like the Canadian Permaculture Legacy videos where he takes you out into the garden, Park Rose Permaculture, Bealton Cottage. Love a Bealton Cottage. Those are my favorite style of videos. But the situation that I'm in right now, I'm just not comfortable doing that at my house, basically. It's not like super private, so I feel very exposed. But in this house, in the walls, I feel fine. Anyway, maybe I'll overcome that kind of fear and be able to do that. But it doesn't matter anyway, because there's no tomatoes. They're all gone. The only tomatoes that I have are all of the green tomatoes that I have in a bag that I think my plan for all those green tomatoes is I'm just gonna tuck them in to the wood chips in the front yard and see if I get tomatoes that pop up in spring. It's a lot of tomatoes, but I think I'm just gonna pop them around randomly and see if anything germinates. And they're not ripe, so I don't know. But I think I might just do that, because otherwise they're going into the compost. So I have some tomatoes to share. There's not a lot. These were all of the tomatoes that actually had ripened up from the green tomatoes since I picked them like 2 weeks ago. So they're a little bit shrivelly, a little bit sad, but otherwise they're representative of what I had grown. So that's why they're here. So I will start by saying what I planted. I didn't plant any purchased seeds for tomatoes. I saved seeds from these yellow cherry tomatoes that we'd bought from the store. I can't remember what they were called, but they had some like fancy name. But they were clearly a hybrid tomato. And I know that because of what I got as a result. And I had aroma from the grocery store that I saved seeds from as well. And so those are what I planted. And the tomatoes that I got I'll share with you. But also, the previous owners of this house had grown in their garden several varieties of tomatoes that I actually had to volunteer in the yard. So I had a slicing type tomato, a red one, that made kind of medium-sized tomatoes and seemed to be a determinate variety. I don't have any representatives of that because that plant actually gave up pretty early compared to the other plants, which were incredibly vigorous. But that plant actually kind of succumbed to a malfunction of my automatic watering system, which I just had not realized that it wasn't watering the plants maybe for like a week, but like in peak summer heat. And the tomatoes were all shrivelly. It was kind of late in the season, and so it might have been September or something. So I just clipped the plant out. I pulled the plant out and I just threw it in the compost. Because the tomatoes that were being produced were small and shriveled. So that was a great tomato. Have no idea what variety it was. I have saved seeds so I can grow it again, and it was overall good for fresh eating. We used it for like caprese salads and tomato sandwiches. A lot of tomato sandwiches in peak summer, very delicious. And that's pretty much that variety. Don't know what it was. It had somewhat of a splotchy, like streaky kind of appearance when the fruits were green. They had like a little bit of a reddish purplish coloring, but then that disappeared and they became fully red. So I haven't found any plastic tags in the garden bed to hint at what that was, but I have found I wish I could remember. It's the little golden one. The little golden cherry tomato, which has made things kind of confusing because I planted the seeds from a little golden cherry tomato. So anyway, I did find a tag for a yellow cherry tomato, and I was like, oh, maybe I had volunteers from other tomatoes from the previous owners of this house as well. So, complications. Next, I'll talk about the Romas. So the Romas, I had one successful seedling. I should mention, I had a ton of problems starting the seedlings, and the main issue was cats. One of my biggest garden pests that I'm still, to this day, dealing with are stray cats and my cat. My cat Gordon, he is an indoor-outdoor cat, and he does like to mess around in my garden beds. And then there's like 5 to 10 stray cats that live in this area. There's a ton of them, and there's probably like 4 that frequent our house frequently. So, and there's a little baby kitten who is now a cat that hangs out at our house, and his mom hangs out at our house. And yeah, we have a stray cat problem, and they tear up seedlings. That's what I'm getting at. They tear up seedlings, and so I had some problems with tomatoes and peppers. I actually didn't have any peppers germinate at all because of cats. Well, they did germinate, they just got torn up, you know. So, the tomatoes, I finally got some to take root and get big, and yeah, I definitely need to start them in little cups. That has to be my main game plan, and I have to be on top of that for the coming year. And I can't plant them out too early, because if I do, then they will get torn up. So, the Roma that I had planted, it grew incredibly incredibly vigorously. I put it in a tomato cage, which was left over from the previous owners of this house. It was in the backyard, and I was like, well, this is convenient. Let me just throw a tomato cage around this thing. And I did, and then it toppled the whole cage. There was one day of pretty heavy winds, and then the whole thing just flopped over, and I couldn't ride it anymore because the plant was so massive. And so the plant grew pretty intensely all over, and I had never, throughout my childhood when we grew tomatoes, I had never done any pruning of tomatoes. When I first heard about that on YouTube, pruning tomatoes, I was like baffled that that was even a thing. It's like it is the thing that I remember my mom saying about tomatoes is that they don't like to be touched, which I don't think is true. I think that was with watering. She didn't want us to splash the water onto the plants, right? Because that can cause wilts and whatever bad tomato problems, which is less of a problem here in California because we have such dry summers. It doesn't rain and splash back onto the plants, you know? So anyway, that's just a caveat on this whole thing. I didn't do any pruning. I didn't do any tying up. I didn't do any maintenance on the tomato plants. And especially for cherry tomatoes, I don't think I am ever going to be a person who does, because they just grow like mad, and it is a little bit inconvenient to actually pick the fruit, but the quantity of fruit that is produced is insane. So I don't really think it matters that much, is my opinion. For the Romas, I could kind of see why it might be a benefit, because I think a large bulk of the Romas were obscured and a little bit, they didn't all ripen very quickly. I think I could have gotten more Romas if maybe I had contained the plant a little bit more. At least them all to ripen before the season ended. Not all of them, but to have more success at having large ripe Romas before the season ended. So I'll show you some of my Romas, and I'll just note that these are smaller than what I had been getting during the season. All of these tomatoes are a little bit stunted compared to what I was getting during the summer. So you can see these guys. All right, yeah, fairly small. But I did freeze a ton of Romas. I think I have 2 or 3 bags of frozen Romas to make some pasta sauce. So, and I'd already made like 2 bags worth of pasta sauce earlier in the season. So happy with that. 1 plant, a lot of fruit. And I also saved seeds from that. Now, the cherry tomatoes. This is very exciting to me. So I wish I remembered. Oh, Sun Gold. That's the little yellow tomato that had the tag in the garden bed. So keep that in mind. If any of these to you scream Sun Gold, let me know. I would be very interested in that. But so the tomato seeds that I saved from the cherry tomatoes, I got 4 or 5 plants to germinate, to grow from those seeds, I think. So I'll show you the tomatoes, the different tomatoes that we got from that. And some of them could be volunteers, keep that in mind. So this is a really poor example, but it's the only one I think I have of a little red cherry tomato that we had. This tomato had a very distinct flavor, a lot more, I guess acidic, definitely less sweet, and almost a little abrasive flavor-wise, was this little red cherry tomato. And it also wasn't incredibly prolific at producing, but it was the only little red one that I had. Then I had these, which were really quite delicious orange cherry tomatoes, and this was very, very vigorous growing and very productive. Like, I can show you the percent that is in here. You can see all of those orange ones. It produced a lot. Then there were yellow pears, and this is what I really don't know. I really don't know if the yellow pear tomatoes were a result of a tomato that had been planted in the garden, and so it was a volunteer plant, or if this tomato was one of the original parents of the cross golden cherry tomato that I got all my seeds from. So anyway, I really like yellow pear. Yellow pear was something that we used to grow every year as a family, I guess. When I was a kid, my mom used to grow yellow pear all the time. And yeah, it's incredibly high producing. We had boatloads of yellow pear all the time, and just a mass of flowers. Super high productive. The tomatoes are very fleshy. They're not very seedy. They're also larger than this. This is a small one because it's one of those green turned into yellow. But all of up above in this neck area is flesh, well as just in this little bit is the seeds. And they're also very, very sweet. So they're almost like candy. The yellow pears are very delicious, in my opinion. And yeah, that was probably the most productive tomato that we had. Yeah, definitely. It was just crazy. Very, very vigorous. Let me see. So then, in my other garden bed, I had just a mass of tomatoes growing in one of the garden beds. And then in the other garden bed, I had one tomato plant from this mystery store-bought yellow cherry tomato. And it produced some interesting tomatoes. So you see this. This is kind of an oblong. Maybe I can get a better example. Like this one. It's kind of oblong and it's yellow. And it's a little bit transparent. And this tomato was prone to having various sizes. So in hotter weather, it seemed to produce much smaller tomatoes. Let me see if I can get an example. Okay, maybe this one. Really, really itty bitty, super tiny tomatoes. And they were also prone to splitting. So just cracking straight through. And then with kind of late fall conditions, or I guess really late summer to fall conditions, we started to get these really nice, big, just a nice tomato producing from that plant. And I'll also mention that that plant didn't have any support at all, and I just let it roam over everything because I don't have a reason. There was no support in that garden bed. The other garden bed has supports that will prop up tomatoes in it pre-made, and then there was the tomato cage already in use. Where this tomato was planted, there were no supports and I didn't have a tomato cage. So I just let it roam, and that was perfectly fine. It was very happy in that growth habit. And I think I'm gonna eat this and I'm gonna tell you what it tastes like. So, the flavor of this tomato is not as good, and I'll explain. It kind of does taste like, it tastes like it has some of these yellow pear traits, but it also tastes like it has some of these little red cherry tomato traits, in that it's got that kind of like, I don't know how to describe the flavor profile of like a very red tomato, but it has that, but it also has the mild sweet of the yellow pear, but in like a not super pleasant way. So these tomatoes are very pulpy, very seedy, I guess that's the right term. They're very seedy, and they have maybe astringent is the right word, but yeah, they're not very pleasant, unfortunately. But these little orange ones are delightful. Also very interesting to note, these little orange ones have a tiny little bit of a teardrop shape at the bottom, which is very interesting. And I don't know what that indicates in terms of what the possible crosses could be that resulted in all these tomatoes. I find it so fascinating, and I wish I had written down what the tomatoes were called that I grew the plants from, because all I wrote on my little seed pack when I saved them was sweet yellow cherry tomato. It's like useless. But anyway. So, my main takeaways for growing tomatoes are that cherry tomatoes are incredibly prolific and super easy. They don't need any attention, except for constant picking. So I saved bags and bags and bags of dried cherry tomatoes. I dehydrated a ton of them. Also understand that I ate these. I made like really quick sauces to have with pasta. I made like little quick tomato salads with these cherry tomatoes throughout the summer, and I saved a ton of them. So I think it's definitely within your interest to save the seeds of tomatoes that you can get if you just want to try out growing tomatoes. I'm squeaking. Like, I have been incredibly cheap in starting out my gardening process. I would take seeds from nature or from wherever when available, like food. Like, I eat a melon, I save the seeds, you know? So you can be incredibly cheap about growing a garden for the first time. And now I actually treated myself for my birthday, and I bought $100 worth of seeds, right? Which I was like, wow. And I have all of these crazy varieties that I'm gonna try, and I'm very excited for that. But just with like these tomatoes, growing the hybrid tomato seeds from the saved tomato, not only did I have incredibly productive food crops, but I also had the joy of seeing this genetic diversity, which was just something unexpected and very fun for me. So I highly recommend doing that. I think, I don't know, I'm really excited about this. Akin to my excitement about those pinto beans, this tomato experiment. I actually think I'm gonna take these tomatoes right here and I'm gonna split them open and save them, and I'm gonna label them because I'm notoriously bad about not labeling things. I will save the seeds from all of these and label them with which specific variety they were, and then I can grow them and see what I come up with later. But anyway, I think that's it for what I have for tomatoes, and I think that's also enough time spent on tomatoes, so I think I will let y'all go. So, as always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. And Matt's cracking open a cold one.